All right, now we're going to go to Public Affairs Officer Dan Huot in Mission Control, and he has a very special guest, Richard Garodnick, who's an ETHOS officer, Environmental and Thermal Operating Systems Officer. So, Dan, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Michael, and hey, everybody. This is Dan Hewitt in Mission Control Houston, and like Michael said, I'm joined right now by Richie Garodnick. He's one of our flight controllers here that helps to make sure our astronauts are always kept safe on board the International Space Station. And you're joining us right now. This really is the nerve center. This is where the International Space Station is flown, controlled, and all the people down here on the ground making sure all the systems are working appropriately. So, Rich, thanks so much for joining me here today. I know they got a lot of great questions, so why don't you guys go ahead and start off?
My name is Dorian Dove, and I wanted to know if the astronauts that are in space can contact their family like they contact mission controls.
Absolutely, they can contact them either every night. They have conferences with their family. They have private family conferences where it's completely isolated from mission control. They can talk to them as many times as they want to, especially on crew days off. They can also spend a lot more time with them as well.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of have, it's almost like a Skype setup where they can talk to their families directly almost anytime they want. So it really helps, removing a lot of those feelings of isolation and things like that.
That's right.
All right, next question.
I'm Joseph Edwards, and I wanted to know if, since it's an international space station and different countries have to communicate, is foreign language a part of astronaut training, or do they all learn English?
Another great question. For all the Japanese and the European astronauts, they all speak English. For the Russians, however, most of the time they will speak Russian. Some of them do know English, but we do have translators that are here, both here and in Russia, that help to translate a lot of that communication down.
And I know a lot of our all of our astronauts are launching on Russian vehicles right now. Part of their mandatory training is they go through Russian language courses, and they actually go over and live with Russian families while they're training. So I think really the two main languages are English and Russian right now on board the International Space Station.
That's right.
All right, next question, guys.
Hello, my name is Nicholas Del Valle, and my question is, what are the effects of being in space for such long periods of time, and how do the astronauts prevent or live with these effects?
Okay. There are a couple different effects for them living in space for a long time. So remember that since there's very little gravity when they're in low Earth orbit, so what they have to do is they have to exercise almost every day, just because they experience some bone loss when they're there for a long time. We're talking about a small amount here, but they exercise for hours a day just to make sure that they can combat that.
Yeah, I mean, they have like treadmills and weightlifting devices on board the International Space Station. Not like you would think of here, because I mean, with that lack of gravity, you can't really pick up a barbell and start lifting it and have it do anything.
That's right.
So they have a couple of different devices. Like on a treadmill, they have a harness that actually pushes them down on it as they're exercising. And like Richie said, they're exercising about 2 hours every single day. So it's quite a lot of work just to stay in shape when you're up in space. All right, next question, guys.
Hi, I'm Shimon Thomas. I wanted to know, how long does it take to prepare to go into space?
I didn't hear that.
How long does it take to prepare to go into space?
That's a good question. Each astronaut actually trains for approximately 2.5 years after they get into the astronaut candidate program, and that is completely scheduled and regimented out for that entire time, including their vacation and everything else. But they're either training here, they're training in Japan, they're training in Europe, training in Russia, but it's a really solid schedule for the next 2.5 years once they get in that program.
I hear they spend a lot of time on the road. Like you said, they're in Japan, they're in Russia, they're in the United States. They're kind of all over the place, and it's 2.5 years of prep for up to 6 months of time in space. So you can almost think of a space flight almost takes up 3 years of your life.
Right.
So it's a lot of training, because by the time they get up there, they need to be completely familiar with every single system on board the station. So everything just kind of becomes reflex. By the time they get up there, they feel like they've already been there for 2 years. All right, next question, guys.
My name is Malcolm Wally. I want to know about how long do you have to stay in bed until you reach your destination?
So how long do you have to stay?
We didn't quite catch that. Could you ask that one more time, please?
I was asking how long do you have to stay in bed until you reach your destination?
How long do you have to stay in what?
I don't know.
It sounds like you're saying how long do you stay in bed?
Right.
And I think he meant more in the space capsule they used to get up to
Okay.
the space station.
All right, so about how long, so from when they launch, how long does it take to get to the space station?
Right, so like how long they're staying in the
Okay,
Soyuz when
yeah.
they're launching up. Okay, so I mean that'll vary. Usually it only take a couple days, even less. The whole idea is that what takes a long time is that they have to try and get in orbit with the space station because the trip is very short. It's only a couple hundred miles that they have to get up because they're launching from Kazakhstan up to the station. So that is very, very short. But then they have to rendezvous with the station and they get in there. So I mean even a day or less, they're really there.
So about 2 days, less than 2 days.
Yes.
All right, next question, guys.
My name is Nandita, and how is the International Space Station beneficial to the Earth?
How is the International Space Station beneficial to the Earth?
I get that question a lot, actually. As you might or might not know, the International Space Station does have a lot of crucial systems that are on board, but on top of that, they work on experiments every day. So they're working on, hundreds of different experiments that they're conducting that can only really be done in microgravity. And if you try to look on the web for a lot of the results, they've come up with thousands of patents that are being generated from the station, and it continues to produce more and more results that are really beneficial to us on the ground.
And I mean, some of the ways, like, for example, our astronauts on board the station have a recycling system that takes wastewater, even, some of the astronauts' waste, and it recycles everything to potable drinking water. So one of their favorite quotes is, "Today's water could be yesterday's coffee." So something like that could have huge implications in places that are stricken by drought or don't have safe drinking water. That's a technology that we develop just for space that we can then use down here on Earth. All right, next question, guys.
My name is Arshia, and I wanted to know if ETHOS could be used to colonize another planet.
I'm sorry, could you speak up a little bit?
My name is Arshia, and I wanted to know if ETHOS could be used to colonize another planet.
We heard something about colonizing another planet.
That's a good question.
One more time, real loud. Just the first part, real loud.
Can ETHOS be used to colonize another planet?
Can ETHOS, so could you go colonize another planet?
By myself, that would be very difficult to do. I think in general, for the International Space Station, as part of our efforts to try and colonize another planet, it's possible just because we're able to recycle a lot of our resources. So when you were talking about transforming, yesterday's coffee and today's water, it's the same thing. So the next thing would be maybe to produce food with leftover carbon or anything like that. But absolutely, recycling our resources is what could bring us to the next step of colonizing another planet. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, the space station really is, it's kind of serving as our test bed. So we're still pretty close to Earth, so if anything goes wrong, we can get back. But we're using it to figure out a lot of the different technologies and methods that we would need if we're going to go to a place like Mars or an asteroid or something like that. So we're making the technologies now that we're going to use tomorrow. All right, next question, guys.
My name is Brandon, and what do you do for free time? What do the astronauts do for free time?
Okay, so although their schedule is pretty regimented throughout the day, they do have time off. They have time where they can either spend with their family, as we talked about before. They can also, watch movies. They can, just stare out the window. They have this one module called the cupola, and it's this giant view of Earth, and so they can stare down at that. And we find a lot of astronauts actually spend a lot of time looking down at Earth and just kind of relaxing like that. So although their day-to-day is very regimented with their exercise and with their experiments, things like that, they are spending some time off.
All right, next question, guys.
My question is, do do your organs function differently in space?
So this was actually thought of a lot during the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs, where the medical community didn't believe that astronauts could really survive in space. But as it turns out, all of the organ function is almost exactly the same. As we talked about before, there was some small bone loss that occurs, but that's why they try to combat it with exercise. But other than that, bodily function is actually almost very similar to it is on Earth.
All right, next question, guys. That was a good one.
Hi, my name is Nicole Williams, and I was wondering if have y'all ever had any emergency situations on the ISS, and if so, how did you fix it?
So if we had any emergencies on ISS, thankfully we have not had any real emergency on the International Space Station. However, that's something that I deal with a lot in training, is trying to deal with the three big emergencies, which is your fire, your rapid depress, and toxic atmosphere.
And what's rapid depress,
So
real quick?
a rapid depress is when if you have like a hole in the station or something like that from like a small meteor hitting it, or anywhere where you're losing pressure from the station at a very fast rate. So what we try to do is we try to isolate that and maybe patch it up if it's small enough. And the same thing with the toxic atmosphere. If there's ammonia that goes into the cabin or anything else that's a spill or something, that can really be considered an emergency event. But thankfully, we have not had any emergencies on ISS. But we are prepared in case any of them were to happen.
That's right. These guys here at Mission Control train very extensively, probably just as much, if not more, than these astronauts, just to get ready to handle. Because everyone in this room is really controlling most of the stuff on board the International Space Station. So if something were to happen, they're the ones responsible for making sure everything turns out okay.
That's
so
right.
they're very ready and they're very prepared. All right, next question.
My name is Nani Venkat, and I was wondering what kind of research is conducted on the International Space Station.
What kind of research is conducted on board the International Space Station?
So there's a multitude of research that's being done on the space station where it comes to if they're trying to use combustion products, or they're trying to figure out how insects survive in space, or they're trying to figure out all kinds of things that they're trying to take advantage of the fact that they're in this microgravity environment. But if you look on the web, there are thousands of them that are being done at the same time. I can't even start to think of really what they're working on.
Yeah, just some of the stuff that we were just taking a look inside the International Space Station. This is a live view of our NASA astronaut Joe Acaba, and he was doing some combustion experiments. So he was basically lighting things on fire earlier today, and they're just trying to figure out, because fire reacts very differently when you don't have gravity down here on Earth. So our scientists are finding out how it reacts and how they can suppress any fires. They do a lot of biomedical experiments looking at how the body reacts to microgravity, and also different things like stress and closed environments and diets and things like that. And then there's materials. There really are thousands of studies that take place on board the station. All right, next question, guys.
How do the astronauts sleep in zero gravity in space?
How do they sleep?
Okay, so that's another good question. In one of the modules that's called Node 2, what they do is they have these areas called the crew quarters, and it's this kind of padded room where they're able to, stand up. They can strap themselves to the wall. They have a fan that's in there, and surprisingly, they find it very comfortable to be in that area. So you would think, you need to be laying down, you need to be in a bed, something like that. But those crew quarters are designed specifically for the astronauts to be able to sleep, and they sleep, almost 8 hours every single night. Absolutely.
And even back on the shuttle, when you don't really have your own little crew quarter, they usually strap themselves down, because, when you're in that microgravity environment, when you're sleeping, you could just float off and start bumping into things.
Right.
So they kind of have like these sleeping bags that they can crawl into and strap themselves to a wall or something. So you don't really get that sensation of laying down, but you can kind of stay in one place and make sure you don't float off and bump your head on something while you're sleeping. All right, next question, guys.
That was the last question from our students, but my name is Tony Williams. I'm the program manager for the STEM program. So I have a question in regards to emergency situations with the crew. Have you had any, and if you do, how do you handle it?
Any emergency situations with the crew? Have we had any?
With the crew on the ISS?
So you're just talking emergencies with the crew members. Could be medical, things like that.
So as far as I know of, there haven't been any that have been classified exactly as an emergency situation. We have had a couple minor things that have happened with the crew, but it's really very small things that have happened. Certainly nothing that would be constituted as an emergency, which is we're very thankful for happening. So.
And I mean, in case of, and we always plan for any scenario possible. So let's say there's a medical emergency with one of the crew members on board. Each of the crew members, as part of their training, gets some proficiency as a medical officer, and then there are always flight surgeons, so people down here on the ground that can walk through the other crew members through any necessary treatment or things like that. And that's actually another one of the technologies that NASA is proving on board the International Space Station, and that's telemedicine. They do regular checkups and things like that with the crew members, and it's all, from people down here on the ground, a few hundred or a few thousand miles away, depending on where the station is, with these astronauts up in space. And that's had direct implications in providing medicine to places in fairly isolated locations that may not have the doctors and people with the real technical knowledge, but you have patients that have a need for that. You can then have your doctors use what's called telemedicine, so basically video audio communications, to then treat people from a remote location. So that would pretty much be how we handle any emergency situations with crew members on board the station. Any other questions from anybody else?
Any other questions? Let's go. Take about 3 more questions. Line up. Let's go. 3 more questions. 1, 2, 3.
Hello again, my name is Nicholas Tovine. My question is, would the ISS soon or in the far future be used as a transit dock for spacecraft trying to discover new places or new substances?
So it sounds like you want to know if it's going to be like the Enterprise from Star Trek, kind of. Is the ISS going to be used to discover new places?
Well, it does have the ability to thrust to different areas, but we're talking about very small reboosts and things like that. Unfortunately, it wasn't built really to explore another area just because of its, the kind of thrusters that are on the side. But there's always the capability that if we built any other ship in space or anything and we use the ISS to do so, that it's a possibility that we can go to other places.
And I mean, your large future spacecraft are going to have things a lot like what the astronauts live in on board the International Space Station, kind of like these habitation modules. So like when we eventually send people to Mars, they'll have big rockets that send cargo and things like that there, but you'll also have these kind of modules that just look like big pods that the astronauts will live in on their journey out there, and those will look very similar to what's on board the station right now. All right, next question.
Yes, my name is Kahama Washington. I wanted to know about the new substances that they find on their missions.
New substances that they find in their missions.
That's a good question.
They're not really out exploring, far off planets or anything like that, so they aren't really discovering new things. They're discovering how substances that we already know of react differently in microgravity. Like a little while ago, I talked about how Joe Akawa was lighting things on fire earlier today just to see how different fuel samples burn and then react in microgravity. They also do different work with different material substances, biological substances, things like bacteria and enzymes react very differently in microgravity. For example, we've been working on developing a vaccine to food poisoning, salmonella. So if any of you have had food poisoning before, you know just how awesome that would be to have a vaccine that would prevent that. So we aren't really discovering anything new, but we're discovering how substances we already know about, how they react differently, and what more we can learn about them. All right, next question.
I'm Patty Song, and about the food on board, is there like any differences with the food here? I know it's all freeze-dried, but it sounds kind of different. Sorry.
Okay, that's another good question. So as far as space food goes, you'll find that a lot of it is actually almost exactly the same that it is on Earth. The only difference is that it comes up actually completely dehydrated, and they have to go to the potable water dispenser, and they have to try and hydrate that food so they can eat it. And another thing that they find is that a lot of the food is actually very bland when they're up there, so they have to be able to add spices and things like that. One of the favorite foods that astronauts actually enjoy a lot now is shrimp cocktail. So they really like having that, that extra sauce, and they like having certain things that can really activate their taste buds. But you'll find a lot of the food is exactly the same.
Yeah, I mean, our food scientists here at the Johnson Space Center will actually go and buy a lot of the food that's flown up there just at local grocery stores. But they have to do research and process the food and package it, and like you said, freeze dry it, dehydrate it, so they can preserve it for long periods of time on board the station. All right, any more questions?
I think that is it for us. On behalf of the students here at the STEM Acceleration Experience Program, we want to thank you for your time, and let's give them a round of applause.
All right, well, thank you guys. Those are some fantastic questions.
With the information that you've given us and have enhanced our young people's knowledge in regards to space. So again, thank you very much.
All right, well, we always love taking questions. Thanks for coming in and visiting us here in Mission Control. Rich, thanks for coming on and answering some questions with me.
Thanks for having me.
Real pleasure. All right, guys, stay in school, stick to math and science. You'll be astronauts someday very soon.